Listen to this podcast now
on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Idea Gen Global Podcast with George Sifakis.
I'm George Sifakis. In a world overflowing with noise, there is one forum where the world's smartest voices connect, where visionaries sit at the same table as innovators, and great minds don't just talk, they act.
Download all of Red Apple Media's podcasts right now through your favorite podcast platform.
What is natural? When you read natural flavors on a label, most people don't realize it's often not real food at all. Those hidden ingredients quietly work against how your body feels and functions over time. That's why Just Ingredients uses only real food ingredients, so you know exactly what you're putting in your body. Stop guessing. Start knowing at justingredients.us.
The Rev and the Rabbi on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Good morning. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Reverend, before I introduce our special guest, I just want to say to you, young people often look at us and say, the older generation, you're not as computer savvy as we are. You got to get up, you got to get with the times. Well, this past week, I reflected on growing up when we weren't so computer involved. We didn't have computers, and it was snowing, and we were glued to the radio to see if school was closed. And if it was a celebration. The young generation, so sophisticated, they don't have that joy anymore. Because
the joy of a snow day.
They don't have no more. Because it's all, you're online, you're remote, right?
That's true. That's true.
Don't be so quick to make fun. Don't be so quick to make fun.
And in New York City school system, which is the largest in the country, they have to have a minimum number of days in school.
Right.
So that affects the holidays and days off, snow days, everything. So a lot has changed.
Yeah. Anyway, we're happy to bring back someone who's so well informed and brings some meaningful insights into issues. I'm talking about Allan Abramson of the famous firm of Abramson Morak in New York City. Allan has worked both sides. He was an assistant district attorney, and he's a criminal defense attorney. So he knows what it is to look at an issue from different perspectives. And the reason we have him on...
clarified that.
What's that?
I'm glad you clarified him working both sides, okay? I don't know. It sounded like he was a double agent, but we're going to get into that.
Yeah. But the reason we want him, obviously, we're going to talk about what happened in Minneapolis and get his perspective. Mm-hmm. Allan, we live at a time where, as you know, people make up their minds before they have all the facts. They see a video or they read a particular column, and that's it. They know. They rush to the conclusion. You saw the videos. Your reaction?
Well, first, good morning, Rabbi. Good morning, Reverend. So nice to be with you. Rabbi, it's a difficult question for me because, to be very candid, I have an opinion. Based on what I have seen so far, I have a very definite opinion as to what happened and how the case should be handled. But what must happen is there must be an independent investigation done by most likely the FBI and, of course, authorities in Minnesota, because the video itself doesn't tell you everything. And again, I have an opinion right now. I also have the right to change my opinion if I learn new information. And they have to look at not only they have to look at all the different videos and compare the different videos. Some of them have sound, some of them don't. What was said, the exact timing of the gunshots, those things are critical. And, I believe that if you're going to accuse someone of a serious crime, the crime has to be that you can't just make a snap decision. Mm-hmm. And by the way, it works both ways. People shouldn't make a snap decision as to what the agents did, or they can have a theory and then test that theory as we learn more and more. But at the same time, you can't, within an hour of the investigation of the incident, call it a good shoot and start calling the victims in the case, domestic terrorists and agitators. You can't do that. That completely prejudices an investigation.
It's amazing. And let me just say this, because we're assuming that, everyone has heard. I wonder why someone wouldn't have heard about the situation that happened on January 24th, where Alex Preddy, who was an ICU nurse in Minneapolis, 37-year-old U.S. citizen, right, was shot and killed by ICE, by federal immigration agents. And he was reportedly filming the operation and attempting to assist a woman, which the video shows, being pepper sprayed when the confrontation escalated. Now, Alan, can you weigh in on the video footage and the latest reports that he goes to a protest march with a license to carry? He's carrying, the gun is holstered behind him, down his back at 6 o'clock, right? And the gun is removed. And once the gun is removed, someone starts shouting, gun. And then officers, begin to unload. He's face down, his back to the police officers. All right, he's on the ground. And yet he's a threat that you would have to use deadly force. A comment, first of all, on going to a protest with a licensed firearm. Is that a no-no from the beginning?
It's very interesting, because one of the ways I look at this case is compare what Alex Preddy did. He was a licensed gun holder. He, had it holstered. He was completely complying with the law. And, by the way, was allowed to attend the protest. But there are many people that seem to have forgotten that Kyle Rittenhouse came to a protest with an AR-15 that was fully loaded. He was underage. He couldn't certainly possess that gun. He crossed state lines with that gun, and he killed 2 people and wounded another. And he was fed everybody. He was invited to Mar-a-Lago. He's invited here. He's invited there. He's a hero on the right. Yeah. But now, for some reason, this licensed gun holder is, we're hearing people say you can't show up at a protest with a gun. Of course you can. Now, whether I think that's a good idea or not, or that's a different story. But that is not a factor here. He was doing something that was completely lawful, exercising his First Amendment rights and his Second Amendment rights. And, you can't just have selective Second Amendment rights.
Right. So what I don't understand is the following. When I, looking back at the beginnings of ICE, and people were very positive because they felt we're going to get the criminals off the streets. And if we can do that, if we can remove them as threats to our society, that is a positive thing, obviously. And it wasn't unanimous, but there was a huge majority that favored that approach. Now we have 2 people, Ms. Good and Mr. Preddy, no criminal background. So why were they? What's the reason for stopping them?
And U.S. citizens. Yeah.
What is it they did that warranted a stop?
Well, again, from what I have seen so far, I don't believe there's anything that warranted them to be stopped, delayed, taken out of car. I mean, also remember, they're taking people out of cars. They're doing car stops and ripping people out of cars. There was a woman who apparently was going to a doctor, was right near her doctor. They cut her seatbelt. They pulled her out. She had some medical conditions. But just, you have to remember, during the Obama administration, Obama deported, I believe it was around 3 million people. That's a lot of people. Most people, A, don't know that, and B, there were no protest marches. I mean, look, some people, have a view of deportations, and it's never appropriate. But I think most people would agree that if you have someone that came into the country inappropriately, which, by the way, it's not a crime, it's a civil offense most of the time. But if they commit a murder, if they are involved in frauds of millions and millions of dollars, things like that convicted criminals, those people, they are the worst of the worst. That's what this was supposed to be about, getting the worst of the worst off the street. Mm-hmm. But that's just not what's happening now. But under Obama, they did deport many people with criminal records. But they weren't these roving, gangs knocking on doors. What led them to Lewiston, Maine, other than the fact that there's a Somali population there?
Yeah, we're going to have to stop you right there, Alan, because we're going to come back, take a break right now. But we'll be back with more of Allan Abramson.
Right here on The Rev and the Rabbi on Red Apple Radio Networks. Stay tuned.
Demo, not for broadcast. Property of WABC New York.
If you're thinking about changing schools, why wait? At Manhattan University, love those guys. You don't have to start over. With transfer-friendly pathways, your credits count, and you keep moving forward. From day one, you're part of Jasper Nation, preparing for the real world. And with New York City just a train away, opportunity is everywhere. Ready to move forward without missing a step? Visit manhattan.edu/transfer and enroll today. Manhattan University. Don't start over, move forward.
This National Foster Care Month, Marine Toys for Tots is providing hope to children who need it most. Staff Sergeant James Caldwell, who grew up in foster care himself, shares that while handing out gifts at a Toys for Tots distribution event, a little girl looked up at him, reached into her bag, pulled out a stuffed animal and said, "Someone needs to make sure you get a toy too." That simple gesture embodies the heart of Marine Toys for Tots, ensuring every child, including those in foster care, experiences the kindness that can transform their future. Visit toysfortots.org today.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Reverend, let me also take a moment to thank Elias Raff, who's our producer, and really does a great job. And we are most grateful to you, Elias. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we're talking about, taking criminals off the street. And we all agree that's a good thing. I don't know anybody who's going to oppose that. But now we're talking about two people who didn't have criminal records and their lives ended. And, Alan, you mentioned other incidences that have occurred. So what's happened here?
Well, first of all, many of the people that are, out there right now are people that some of them have only had 47 days of training. They have no idea what they're doing. But they've also been given permission to go into people's homes without warrants. You need a judicial warrant to enter someone's home. You can't go in with an administrative warrant, but that's exactly what's happening here. And by the way, something else that everyone should be aware of, they keep talking about sanctuary cities. The policy in Minnesota was that if they had somebody in custody who was convicted of a crime and ICE or ICE dropped a detainer saying, look, when you're ready to release him, we would like him in our custody, Minnesota, they validate those detainers. They obey those detainers. So, Minnesota's really taking it on the chin, but they were doing what was reasonable. And by the way, they say, well, the police department's not really, supporting this. Well, there are 600 cops in Minneapolis, 600. There are over 3,000 federal agents now. But those 600 cops are not there to just work with federal agents. They're doing all the police work that is required in the city. They can't be, working on these deportation things. It's just not at the same time, the people that are actually doing it, they're wearing masks. They're not showing a badge. They have no name. They are carrying weapons of war. They are dressed as if they're about to, go on some SEAL Team 6 mission. And it's all militarized, and people are reacting to that. People that supported, a real effort at deporting people from this country. Many people who felt that way no longer feel that this is the way we can do it.
So, Alan, tell us. I mean, someone, comes up to you wearing a mask, fully armed, and verbally identify themselves as an ICE agent, all right? And they then become aggressive, no showing of credentials or anything. What does John Q. Citizen do in response to a situation like that?
That's a great question, Reverend. It really is. But we have to start off with a basic principle. In this country, you don't have to carry your papers with you to prove that you're a U.S. citizen. Cops are not allowed to just ask you for papers on a random basis or because you fit a certain, ethnic profile. You can't do that. And that's a bedrock principle in this country. Nobody ever walks around with their passport or with their, things that could prove, their birth certificate to prove that they were born here. I mean, this is all new. An interesting question, though, is, let's say you get pulled over and a masked guy comes up to the car and he wants to see, proof of citizenship. And you happen to have your passport with you. You're just coming back from the trip. It's in your bag. Do you show it? Because you're not required to show it. But if you don't show it, look at what's happening to people. And to me, that's a horrible choice to have to make, to either exercise your rights as an American citizen or just take a sort of easier way out, non-confrontational way out, and show them what they've asked for. And by the way, I've heard there have been many stories of people showing various papers or passports, etc., and then they don't believe that those are accurate. They're fakes, they're forgeries. Go ahead. Sorry.
Allan, let's talk about that training again. You want to be a New York City policeman? There's required training. You're saying to be a member of ICE, how many days?
Well, right now, the training period was cut down to 47 days.
No experience necessary?
No experience necessary. As a matter of fact, and they were attracting people, they're offering $50,000 bonuses. They're doing something if people have student loans. They're taking, right now, because I'm actually familiar with it, they're taking prison guards at the MDC, and the prison is empty of guards because they're all joining ICE, because they're all, getting, these huge bonuses to them, but they're not trained as cops. They're not trained to fight crime. They're trained as prison guards, which is a difficult position, but that training does not prepare you for what happens out on the street.
So essentially, these are bounty hunters. If they're not trained or have a rush through training, they're not taught to de-escalate. They're not taught the discretionary use of force, which are things that are critical to law enforcement officers. They're not taught this at all. And that leaves us as a citizen. Go ahead,
It
Allan,
is one
please.
of the major parts of law enforcement training these days, to de-escalate, okay? Mm-hmm. And they talk to you about the tone that you should have in your voice when you're approaching somebody, and how to de-escalate an argument when you get in an argument with someone in the public. That isn't being taught to these guys at all. As a matter of fact, I think they're being encouraged to be, more aggressive, so they can show, as a warning sign to people that are thinking of coming here. But it's that kind of aggression that creates the problems that we have. And when we talk about, let's say, de-escalating, cops are taught you don't go in front of a car, ever. Mm-hmm. You don't go in front of a car. You stay off to the side. And by the way, in terms of like a justification, you can't claim that my life was in danger if you put your life in danger.
Right.
You can't create that situation that then allows you, to fire into a car.
You're going back to Renee Good and that situation because, when you look carefully at the position of the officer who fired on her, where the bullet entered to the extreme driver's side left of the windshield, and then the other two bullets through the window into her face. This is not someone who was in front of the vehicle. And I know they're going to argue about this, and that raises another question. All right, do these agents have immunity? And can a person bring if not a criminal suit, a civil suit against them?
Allan, hold that response because we're going to have to take a break here. Let me also mention that, Allan, you've represented police as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's why I say
So we're going to come back.
When we get back, I just want to talk about you have to look at each individual shot and each individual officer that was there on the scene and judge their conduct individually.
Right.
All right. We know you're loving this conversation. The Reverend the Rabbi right here on Red Apple Radio Networks. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Rev, your question.
So before we jumped off, what recourse in a situation like this? Let's say the family of a Renee Good or an Alex Preddy, because ICE agents supposedly have immunity. Is that true? And in such a situation, maybe not a criminal case, but at least a civil case can be brought. Help us understand where we are.
There have been many cases where people have brought civil lawsuits against federal agents. And it's a complicated analysis. But if the agent is sort of acting outside of his training and outside of what his job description is, that may open the door to both civil and criminal charges. So the idea that they have immunity, they don't have immunity. They have certain protections, but they are limited. They may, for example, if they're charged in Minneapolis court, they may have the right to remove that case to a federal court where you might have different types of juries and judges, etc. But the laws of Minnesota, I believe, I'm not certain, but I believe the case would be tried under the laws of Minnesota, but in a federal courtroom. But the idea that there is no accountability here is just wrong.
So let me ask you this, Allan. If you were now in the investigation part of it, what questions would you be asking officers?
Well, candidly, I don't think any of the officers are going to be talking to investigators. They're all going to have attorneys, and they're going to let their attorneys speak for them. And that everybody has that right, including, federal agents. They do not have to speak. But if I were investigating, you have to, as I said before, you have to look at it minute by minute. You have to look at it shot by shot. For example, you talk about the first shot that hit Renee Good. That was from the front of the car. It went through the windshield. And maybe that's a good shot. Maybe it was. Maybe he wasn't standing exactly in front of the car. Maybe she was trying to hit him. Maybe. But then you have to look at the other shot. That even if the first one was justified, the other two are not justified and can be, the reason why she died. So, and in the Preddy case, I hear there's been 10 shots fired, 12 shots fired. Well, the person who fired the first shot, what was happening that led to that? But then you have to look at the actions of each individual agent in order to determine whether it was appropriate or not.
Given what you just said, Allan, does it make sense? Is it better off for the agent if each agent, since you're talking about breaking it down like this, if each agent has their own defense attorney, or for them to come together collectively as a group in response to a situation like this? They
all must have their own defense attorney. As a matter of fact, going way back to a case that I was involved in, the Avenel-Louima case, two of the police officers wanted certain attorneys to represent them. And the government objected and said there was a conflict, and the government really objected. And those convictions were overturned by the Second Circuit because it was a conflict that couldn't be waived. They can have joint defense agreements, but each one must have their own conflict-free lawyer representing them if there's going to be a case.
And you understand why, of course, and explain it to, please, our audience, why it would be advantageous to have them grouped together under one defense team as opposed to individual. Because I'm assuming that it makes the stories come together and consistent, as opposed to now breaking down these officers and cutting deals where they are contradicting each other.
Well, first of all, it would be highly unlikely that any of these agents would be testifying at a trial. It just doesn't happen. But that's what their lawyers are supposed to be doing. Their lawyers are supposed to be telling their stories. And again, they can work together. They can have joint defense agreements. They can discuss strategy and see if one person's, story that they're talking to the lawyer about is consistent with another person's story, and they can work together. But they must have their own attorneys.
One of the things that comes across in this discussion is you don't want to second guess police. You don't want to second guess and say, well, I would have done this. They shouldn't have done that. And that's why it's important to have a very thorough, comprehensive examination of everything. You said each bullet that was fired, step by step. But I just think sometimes you have to make a judgment in a millisecond. And that's got to be ascertained. What were you thinking at that moment when you fired the shot?
That is an important thing to understand. You may not be able to hear it in the agent's own words, but, you have to, again, if someone yelled gun and the officer that fired the first shot, that wasn't justified. And I've seen this happen in other cases. But that shot ricochets and it goes past another one of the agents. Now the agent heard somebody yell gun. A bullet is flying past him. He thinks he's being shot at. He takes out his gun and returns fire. I mean, that has happened in many cases. That has happened in many, many cases. So it is very important that the investigation be thorough and fair. And you really can't have people in the government, blaming the victim, within minutes, calling them agitators and rioters. This wasn't a riot. Neither of these things were riots. They were protests. Right. But you can't characterize these people this way. And by the way, one of the things that's really upsetting people in Minnesota is the federal government isn't investigating what happened on the street. They're investigating the wife of Renee Good. They're investigating Preddy. I mean, what are we doing?
Yeah, like he's a criminal. Yeah, the victim is the criminal at play here. So let me ask you a question. In cases like this, because new video footage emerged showing Preddy in a prior confrontation with federal agents about 11 days before that confrontation where he was shot and killed. Bringing that up, and in fact, they said he was tackled and sprayed with gas. Does that play a role in making judgment, if this were a case in court, as to what happened at the scene where he was killed? Well,
I'm going to offer my opinion on this one. What happened 11 days prior to this has no relevance whatsoever to what happened on the street that day. We don't know. Did the agents know who he was? Were they aware that first incident? I believe he had his gun with him, but his jacket was never. Nobody knew that he had a gun at that point. So I think that is just a way of casting a shadow on Alex Preddy.
Right. Yeah.
It's not relevant to what happened at that moment on the street where he was killed.
Yeah, we have 2 minutes left. I remember a few days ago reading an article by Mike Lawler, Republican member of Congress, and he said, when you see what happens in these situations, it really cries out for the need for local police and federal agents to work together. The local know many of these people. They could help diffuse it to a greater extent, or help diffuse it because others are not diffusing it. Right? But you need some cooperation, not people kept apart from each other.
And you also need local investigators, and Minnesota has a very good investigative team, a Bureau of Apprehension or something along those lines. You must have both state and federal offices working together on this investigation.
I'm glad you brought that up because, we're running out of time. But the handling of the investigation has caused internal conflict within the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minneapolis because some prosecutors are frustrated over federal oversight and potential obstruction because of federal oversight. Speak to that quickly in time to react.
Well, it's a very sensitive subject. It really is upsetting to me. A number of prosecutors resigned from the office because they were told to investigate relatives of the victims. And they quit. And immediately, though, the Attorney General says, they didn't quit. I fired them. If they want to join the other side and fight against, there's no place for that. There is no place for that. These people that are prosecutors, many of them were lifelong prosecutors, they didn't quit, willy-nilly. They quit because they were asked to do something that was against, every fiber in their being, because that's not the way you investigate a federal case.
Allan, we've come to the end of the segment. I just want to say this. We obviously don't have all the answers, but we certainly have asked a lot of questions. And I wish people would take that approach of questioning more and not immediately answering more. Give it time, see what happened, follow, various sources, but don't just condemn someone, convict someone without that knowledge. And unfortunately, social media, we talk about accountability. There's no accountability on social media. You can say whatever you want. You can denigrate someone, destroy someone's reputation, and there's no penalty for it.
Yeah, Wild West. Allan, it's been great having you on the program. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. So many more questions are gelling in my mind as we think about these things. We've got to have you back on, I'm sure. Yeah. But thank you for your expertise on this.
And Rev, as I always tell people, you may not be carrying all the papers you need, but you need to carry Allan Abramson's card. Have it with you.
That's one thing.
You never know.
For sure.
You need that card.
I'll agree with that also. But gentlemen, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. All right.
Yeah, great program. We'll be back with more of The Rev and the Rabbi right here on Red Apple Radio Network.
Thanks for listening to The Rev and the Rabbi. You can hear The Rev and the Rabbi Sunday mornings at 7. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?
Listen to this podcast now
On the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Leadership Thread with Dr. Peggy Polonis.
I'm Dr. Peggy Polonis. Join me on each episode where I unravel the story that shaped leaders, tracing the thread that led them where they are today. Because leadership isn't born in adulthood. And thank you once again for joining us on the Leadership Thread, education, ethics, and sustainability.
Download all of Red Apple Media's podcasts right now through your favorite podcast platform.